Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. I made a big find at Lowe's on the clearance rack yesterday. This is actually a plant that Steph and I had been hunting for the landscape here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. This is a Bignonia capreolata, which is a native cross vine. It's a fantastic plant for hummingbirds. Gets these long 2-inch bell-shaped flowers that are probably 1.5 inches across in clusters. Super showy. Blooms heavily in the spring. It's evergreen. It's got a lot going for it. This is a particular named variety that I'll talk more about in just a minute. I've got this spot. We're eventually going to have a wooden fence around about 2/3 of the back garden, but this chain link piece behind me is actually a shared piece with the neighbor. Haven't quite negotiated how I'm going to switch that piece out or when it would ever be done. And so I'm going to plant this vine. We had a plan for putting a Bignonia across this section of it to hide it. Other shrubs have already been planted that will eventually screen this space, but it's going to take a little while when you plant something, you know, that's this size, like this Alyssium right here. It's going to take a little while for that to grow. This Bignonia will hit the ground running and will cover a lot of this fence very quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and get it in the ground, and then we'll talk more about this particular Bignonia and why we had been on the lookout for it. This area toward the back of the property has a lot of roots. There's a wooded, basically back up to the woods back here, and some of the roots are back over in this area, and this area tends to stay drier than the rest of the garden. So just keep that in mind about your space. It's not always, even on a very small urban lot like we're on in Raleigh, we have places where we know we can plant something and just kind of walk away from it because it tends to stay more moist. And we know the areas in the landscape now that we probably have to monitor a plant for a year after it goes in the ground. And this space is that space in this garden. We've had some rain recently, but the soil I just pulled out of that hole was just absolutely bone dry. The trees behind us back here are stealing it. But this is the perfect plant, you know, to compete in that type of situation. It's a native, you know, fast growing vine. So I pulled the mulch back here. We had laid down a layer of compost and some wood chips in the past, which have broken down. So anytime we dig a hole now, we're incorporating that organic material. Got it in the ground and slid the mulch back into place. This thing needs a lot of water. Typically, I don't plant in super dry spaces, but I was shooting this video this morning. This is the time I had to do it. So I just planted a plant into very dry soil. So I'm going to bring the water hose over here and just water this area very thoroughly. But typically I'd rather plant when the soil's a little bit moist. And so, you know, it's not quite such a shock. And then I know I have the area moist while I'm digging the hole. I can see that, you know, it's not bone dry like this one is. So I'm going to give this one a little more attention. But typically I won't plant into just as dry as dusty soil as that was. The foliage on Bignonia is really nice as well, and it's dark green in the spring, summer, and fall. And then in the winter, it will thin some, but it is considered evergreen, and it'll have kind of a purplish hue to the foliage during the winter time. It's hardy in zone 6 to 9. This one was found on the very bottom of its range in zone 9 is where it was located, but it's been proven to be very cold hardy as well. So zone 6 to 9. One thing I look for on clearance plants, especially woody plants like this, like a vine or a shrub or a tree, this one's just simply off color. So it had, you know, the fertilizer had run out on it and it sat on the table for some period of time and it just got a little bit off color, a little yellow. There's no part of the plant that's actually dying. There's no, the roots were still in good shape. It hadn't been overwatered or really underwatered. It had just sat there for too long without fertilizer, and it was a little off color. My clay-based soil will correct that in a hurry, and it'll hit the ground running. But be cautious with some of the plants. If they're actually, you know, physically, you know, one branch or more are dying, you know, you might want to take the pot, flip it over, and make sure the roots aren't brown, or make sure that you can kind of pull at them and they don't break apart. They're not just, you know, goo. Basically, what happens when a plant gets root rot is it just becomes goo in the container. Frequently, we can see root rot on those situations where it actually got very dry. They didn't water it for a while, and then they overcompensated and watered it a ton. That's where we can see that root rot problem happen frequently. But anyway, this one had the roots were great, just slightly off color. Why did I want this particular one? This variety is called Jekyll, and Dr. Durr, who's been on the channel a few times now, him and his wife Bonnie found this one on Jekyll Island in Georgia. Apparently they were riding their bikes and saw this particular one stood out because it has bright orange flowers. So it was either some sort of chance seedling or some sort of cross, but it had much brighter orange flowers, so it stood out. He took cuttings on them. It's been in the trade for a while. Bignonia has 2 leaves on each side of the stem as they come down, and then a third modified leaf, which is just a tendril right here, that can not only wrap around things, but it also has holdfast on it, so it can hold to almost anything. So a tree, a brick, anything you put it on. This one, this is one of those native plants that can really grow in a hurry. So, if you're not a person who knows that you can stay on top of maintenance in your landscape, this might not be the best vine. This vine can get 50 feet long in a hurry and will need to be tamed occasionally. So I'm just going to let it go along this chain link fence, come out here once a year and get after it. It'll have the trumpet-shaped flowers in the late spring, and then this one has a tendency to repeat bloom, so it will repeat bloom later in the summer. But I'm super excited. Dr. Durr's been on the channel a few times now. This was one that he had named and one that Steph and I had been on the lookout for, and then it happened to be on a clearance table at Lowe's for half price. I think it was originally $19.98, and so I got it for $10, just slightly off color. Again, native plant. It's going to take over this fence in a hurry. So there you go. Thank you guys for watching, and be on the lookout for this Jekyll Bignonia.